Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're cracking open the PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report. It's packed with juicy details for IT pros, but we're here to distill the need to know for, well, everyone.
Because, let's face it, cybersecurity affects us all.
It really does. So we're diving straight into the world of CVEs, those common vulnerabilities and exposures you might have heard about. Think of them like those little cracks in the foundation of our digital lives.
And just like ignoring a crack in your house can lead to, well, bigger problems.
Exactly. So let's start with CVE 2024-6197. Sounds like a robot name, right?
Yeah.
But this one's a bit of a beast. That's Windows 11, specifically versions 21H2, 22H2, 23H2, and even the latest 24H2. And it exploits something called a stack buffer, which sounds very...
Technical.
Yeah. Can you break it down for us? What does it actually mean?
Imagine your computer's memory like a filing cabinet, right?
Yeah.
Each program gets its own drawer. Now, a buffer overflow is like someone stuffing way too many files into one drawer. It overflows, messes up other drawers, maybe even damages the whole cabinet.
And in this case, that overflow can actually let attackers sneak in their own malicious code. That's what we call remote code execution.
It means a hacker could potentially take control of your computer all from afar, steal data, install malware, you name it. Not a fun scenario.
Okay, that's seriously creepy. But how does this even happen? Do we have to, download something shady for this to trigger?
Good news is, this one needs a little help to cause chaos. It requires what we call user interaction. Think clicking a suspicious link, opening a dodgy attachment, that sort of thing.
So those phishing emails everyone warns us about.
Exactly. Be wary of anything that seems off. And of course, keep your system and antivirus updated. Those patches are like digital armor, folks.
Solid advice. Now let's switch gears to CVE 2024-43529. This one involves the Windows print spooler. Sounds almost harmless, right? Like a cute little office helper.
Deceptive, isn't it? Because this one's all about hackers trying to level up their access to your system.
Level up, like in a video game.
Kind of. Imagine they managed to sneak in through a side window. This vulnerability is like them finding the master key to your entire house.
Oh, no.
In tech terms, it's an untrusted pointer dereference. Basically, it lets attackers mess with how your system accesses information, potentially giving them more control than they should have.
So a stepping stone for even worse things.
Exactly. It's like that old saying, give them an inch and they'll take a mile. Security is all about layers, about making it as hard as possible for those bad actors.
Speaking of miles, let's jump to CVE 2024-43599. This one hits close to home for a lot of us. The remote desktop client. With so many working remotely these days.
Our home offices become potential targets, unfortunately, this vulnerability. It could let an attacker run their code on a machine that's connected remotely. Imagine someone secretly controlling your computer while you're working on it. That's the potential impact here.
Okay, now that's just unsettling. And I'm guessing this is a high priority threat.
Definitely. It gets a CVSS score of 8.8.
CVSS score. Remind us what that means again.
Right, so the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS, is like a threat level rating system. It goes from 0 to 10, with 10 being run for the hills. 8.8 is high, my friend.
So what can people who rely on remote desktop do to protect themselves? I mean, it's not like we can just stop working, right?
Of course not. But strong, unique passwords are your best friend here. And turn on that multi-factor authentication if you can. It's like having a security guard for your security guard.
Love that analogy. Double the protection.
Exactly. And while we're on the topic of remote access, there is another CVE we should talk about. CVE 2024-43582. This one targets the remote desktop protocol server itself.
Okay, so 2 remote access vulnerabilities back to back. That's got to be a red flag for anyone who, uses a computer these days.
It highlights how attractive these remote connections are for attackers. This one's particularly nasty because it could, in theory, allow a complete system takeover.
Complete, like they have the keys to the kingdom.
Pretty much. It exploits a part of the communication protocol called WebSocket.
WebSocket. Sounds familiar, but I couldn't tell you what it actually is.
It's how a lot of web apps do their thing in real time. Think chat apps, online games, they use WebSockets to stay connected. This CVE messes with how the remote desktop protocol server handles these connections.
So it's like hijacking the communication line itself, not just sending a bad message.
Precisely. Now, the silver lining is this one's trickier to pull off. It relies on what we call a race condition.
A race condition.
Yeah.
That sounds intense.
Imagine a hacker trying to slip through a door that's only open for a millisecond. That's the kind of timing they need.
So a bit more complex than just sending a malicious email, thankfully.
Thankfully, yes. But the potential impact, that full system control, means we can't ignore it. And like many we've talked about, this one impacts a range of Windows versions from Windows 10, versions 21H2 and 22H2, all the way up to Windows 11, versions 21H2, 22H2, 23H2, and 24H2.
Wow, it seems like anyone using Windows, especially for remote work, needs to be extra careful and keep those systems updated.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially in the world of cybersecurity.
So we've been talking about Windows a lot. But hey, Windows isn't the only thing out there. What about our browsers? Like, even if I'm super careful of the links I click, can my browser itself be a weak spot?
You're hitting on a crucial point because no software is perfect. And our browsers, well, they're like open doors to the internet if you're not careful. This week's report actually flags a couple of vulnerabilities, CVE 2024-9603 and CVE 2024-9602, and those specifically target the V8 JavaScript engine.
V8 JavaScript engine.
Yeah.
And now we're really getting technical.
It sounds complicated, but think of it this way. Your browser's like a car, right? Needs an engine to run. Well, the V8 JavaScript engine is one of those engines, a popular one. It's what makes those interactive websites we all use, well, work.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah.
But if there's a flaw in the engine...
The whole thing can go haywire.
Exactly.
So these vulnerabilities, they could really mess things up. What exactly do they do? They exploit something called type confusion. It's a bit like, imagine you get a package, right? And it says books on the label, but you open it up and it's full of kitchen appliances. That's type confusion, tricking the system by labeling something wrong.
That's one confusing delivery.
Right. And in this case, attackers use that confusion to sneak in malicious code. It could let them hijack your browser or maybe even your whole system just from that mismatch.
Yikes. So being careful about shady websites isn't enough if the browser itself has a weak spot. What can we do?
Updates are your best friend, as always. The good news is, these specific ones, they've already been patched in the latest Microsoft Edge, version 129.2792.89. So, Edge users, update. And if you're on Chrome or other Chromium-based browsers, well, those updates usually roll out fast, too. Just make sure you've got automatic updates turned on or check manually.
Updates, updates, updates. It's like the digital equivalent of washing your hands, it seems. Before we move on, though, any other key takeaways from these browser vulnerabilities?
Even the biggest, most used software out there, it's not immune. That's the lesson here. Staying informed, being cautious online, and keeping everything updated, that's how we stay ahead of this stuff.
Great advice. So we've covered some serious vulnerabilities, from remote access to browser exploits. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? What about those known issues we hear about those tech hiccups? They're more like warning signs than full-blown attacks. All right, so we've talked about those urgent vulnerabilities, the kind that make headlines. But what about those tech gremlins, the ones that are more like warnings than full-blown alarms? Those known issues that, can still really mess up your day.
Like, that pothole on your street, the one you try to avoid, but it's still there waiting to rattle your car.
Exactly. So let's start with one that's bugging some Windows 11 users, those with versions 21H2, 22H2, and 23H2 specifically. Seems the September 2024 update, the one that was supposed to fix stuff, well, it's actually causing some devices to get stuck in a reboot loop. Talk about ironic.
The old one step forward, two steps back scenario. It seems the update, while addressing other issues, may have inadvertently introduced this reboot problem for some.
So what can you do if you're stuck in this loop? Asking for a friend, of course.
Thankfully, Microsoft knows about it, and they're likely working on a fix. But in the meantime, some users have had luck by uninstalling that problematic update or going back to a previous restore point.
Good to have some options while we wait, right? Okay, the next known issue is a little niche, but important for those running a dual boot system with, say, Windows and Linux.
Right. This one's about a security setting in Windows called SBAT, Speculative Store Bypass Control. It's meant to protect against certain hardware vulnerabilities, but it seems to be clashing with how Linux boots up in some dual boot setups.
So, two security measures, butting heads instead of playing nice. What's the takeaway for our dual booting listeners?
Awareness, mostly. If you're running a dual boot system and suddenly having boot problems after a Windows update, this SBAT setting, it's worth looking into. There are ways to disable or tweak it, which might smooth things over.
Sounds like a recipe for a whole other deep dive. All right, last known issue for today. We're going into the cloud with this one. Azure Virtual Desktop, to be precise.
This one's impacting those enterprise users, the ones relying on virtual desktops hosted on Microsoft Azure. And the issue: some users are getting hit with a black screen when they try to log in, basically locked out of their virtual workspace.
That sounds beyond frustrating, especially if you're trying to get work done.
Absolutely. And early investigations, they suggest it might be tied to the AppX deployment service, which handles app installations and updates in those virtual environments. Something's going wrong during that process, it seems, leading to the dreaded black screen.
So for IT folks managing Azure Virtual Desktop, definitely something to put on the radar.
For sure. But on the bright side, Microsoft is on the case, already released some initial guidance and potential workarounds.
Always good to end on a hopeful note. Well, we've covered a ton today, haven't we? From those critical vulnerabilities to these persistent known issues that just love to throw a wrench in our digital lives.
It really underscores that in cybersecurity, knowledge truly is power. The more we know, the more we can protect ourselves. Being cautious, keeping our systems updated, it all adds up.
Couldn't agree more. And remember, for more details on anything we discussed, check out the show notes. We've got links to additional resources there. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and we'll see you in the digital world.